Peace, peace. Welcome back. This is the place where we bring sexy back to the everyday hardworking men and women who impact your life within close proximity. We want to rise above this madness, which is called black culture. And I know a lot of times when I say that, that triggers people. But basically, culture is simply what you do. And the question is, we as non-white people in the concept called America, what is it that we do every day? Well, according to the code that was written by Nelly Fuller Jr., he says that black people's number one priority is showing off to other black people each and every single day. Which also begs the question that what can the world learn from black people, which was always asked. And you always got the same answers. We can dance, we can sing, we can play ball. But what does that mean in the grand scheme of things when we're trying to solve problems for a community that still seeks to have social justice, equity, and to be able to live autonomous? As you know, whenever you come to this platform, you know I'm always about solving problems. I'm about self-improvement. I'm about bringing things back together that have been divided, about reiterating and reinstalling the value of love and understanding and being at patience and having compassion and peace for one another, because we are a great people, a very cerebral people. I've always heard the saying that when we get frustrated with one another, first thing we always say is niggas are just stupid or black people are just dumb. And it's neither of the truth, neither one are the truth. The simple matter of it is how are we wired? What do you think about? We've proven that once we apply the value where the energy flows, that we do great things. We accomplish great tasks and we overcome great obstacles. Well, as you all know, I've been talking about this guest for maybe a little bit of a month, and you understand that I like to have people come on this platform that are passionate about what we're trying to do, the things that I'm trying to solve. And I like to have people that are passionate about what they do as far as the people and the service to the community. Tonight, I have brother Nicolas Baham coming on the third. He has 25 years in black studies as a scholar, teaching at universities, speaking all around the country, and he's even been on podcasts, even across the waters and on sea and over the seas. But he's going to talk about a lot of realities that we're facing. We're going to talk about the post-election, what went wrong. What does the Democratic Party need to change and reshift when it comes to a party? We're going to also talk about how he was inspired by the oratory and impactful words of Reverend Wiiliam Barber. I guess he heard recently, not too long ago, at a convention. But for a man of great caliber, of great education, to be impacted by such a man, I am curious myself to see what he has to offer and what he has to say. And also, he has authored quite a few books, and we'll be talking about his new detective novel tonight. This book myself, I have been reading, which is called The Podcaster's Dilemma. Now, this book caught my attention just because I podcast, and I found this book to be a very, very great value. It was a learning tool. It is a learning tool, and I have yet to complete the book, but what I've learned so far, I will present these things on the show. Also, we're going to be talking about his beloved hometown of San Francisco, which he now has made his transition to Oakland, and we're going to highlight some things that's been going on out there in these two cities that many people don't even have a clue of what's going on. But you've heard enough of me and about my guests. And if you and listen, I have posted the link for the book. This is a great read, so I suggest that you go down, click the link, and go check out this book, because many of you have been talking about podcasting. I get questions about podcasting, where to start and begin podcasting. And so this is what I suggest, that you pick up this book and you read. And you can have these jewels tucked in whatever subject matter you want to talk about. But I think this right here will supplement you as a podcaster moving forward. And therefore, you could be successful. And also, if you haven't gotten your copy, Empowering the Perfect You, Self-Improvement Tips for Black Men in the Era of Rejected Masculinity, it's also down in the link as well. Well, you've heard enough from me, man. I want to get ready to go ahead and bring the guest on. I'm excited. There's a lot we're going to learn tonight and a lot we're going to get into the spiel. So without keeping the brother waiting, man, what's going on with you, man?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm still learning, man. I am still learning. I want to thank you for coming on, man. And the sister that presented you to me when she reached out to me, and I was putting out in the podcast group, just looking for guests of high caliber. And she immediately presented to you. She emailed me and we discussed it back and forth. And I was like, hey, let's make it happen. And upon the first conversation that we had initially, man, I was just so impressed. I was even to the point where I told you I would like for you to be, if we can organize it for next year, on a guest summit and a power panel of great black men who are servicing the community, who have, great stories to tell and wisdom to offer the youth and people who care to make a change in their community. As we always say, we want to raise the change that we can see. But other than that, man, what's going on with you out there on the West Coast this evening?
A little this and a little that in this post-election world. It's increasingly crazy, trying not to be traumatized by every one of these cabinet appointments.
I know that's right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't California was a blue state during the election? Correct.
That's right. Yeah, and she's from here. I actually had a chance many years ago when Kamala Harris was district attorney of San Francisco. I had a chance to meet her. She did something for me. My
Mm-hmm.
family had a educational consulting company at the time, and we were doing something for San Francisco Unified School District high school students. It was a job fair, and we had all the tech companies coming up, and folks could interview with them. We reached out to the city for a keynote speaker, and no one responded except her. And she came and she spoke to the students. She talked about her own story coming up. She was very relatable. But the thing that I noticed about her was that she was extremely charismatic,
Mm-hmm.
which really didn't show up for me on the television. When I would watch, I followed her career, obviously, see her on television. I have voted for her 2024 in this election, and but I didn't see that charisma until she got the nomination, and
Okay.
that was the person that I saw face to face. She owned the room. It wasn't just, people like to reduce it to, she's a beautiful woman.
Mm-hmm.
She is a boss. I mean, she owns that room. You don't always see that, and some people, get sort of distracted by the sort of happy warrior laugh that she has. She
Yes.
don't play though. She don't play.
Yes. So let me play that. Let me bring this up. I like to always have transparent and open conversations. Now, um, I've been in discussions with people from California. A lot of these people I meet on Fanbase, the platform by Isaac Hayes, the third, who started CEO and founder. There are some black people from the state of California that's not crazy about Kamala Harris. They always go to the thing of, well, she wasn't crazy about, freeing a lot of black men who were, unjustly incarcerated. Some of her laws and policies, things that, white politicians had to get by, they had to kind of enforce her to do that she should have did on her own, having the value for her own community. What say you? What's your perspective on those claims that a lot of people from the state of California, black people at that make those claims against her that really just didn't care for Kamala Harris?
Yeah, so the problem with Kamala Harris is that she is neither progressive nor kind of regressive around criminal justice issues. And
Mm-hmm.
her positions have changed over the years. The numbers of people who she allegedly, quote unquote, put in jail, and that's kind of a false statement, too. I mean, the police are the ones making the arrests, but
Mm-hmm.
the people that her office prosecuted, who may have been black men, those numbers are generally fairly exaggerated, but any
Mm-hmm.
number of them are significant. Those are individual lives, and I'm not going to critique anybody for being upset about that. You have a right
Mm-hmm.
to be upset about that. But I think one of the things that we forget is that it's also a revolutionary act when black people are in the offices of district attorney and attorney general. So for people, I think, forget that for decades in this country, there were only white men in those offices. Are we where we need to be in police reform? Absolutely not. But we've actually just seen out here in California, in Alameda County, the removal of a progressive DA for Alameda County, Pamela Price. So her thing is, well, she wasn't hard enough on crime. I'm not sure where the line is. And I think if you look at Kamala's career out here in California, she was always trying to figure out where the line was.
Mm-hmm.
The politics kept shifting. I think we also forget that in our community during the Clinton administration, we advocated for tougher sentencing, which
Mm-hmm.
led to the devastating crime bill that led to the mass incarceration that we were protesting against in the wake of George Floyd. We were responsible for that. Our churches, our leaders were asking for that bill. Our Congressional Black Caucus advocated for that bill, and it was devastating to our communities. Yet it seems like with all of the black prosecutors out there, and the black folks who were behind supporting the crime bill, Kamala Harris got the brunt of that blame. Whether correct
Mm.
or incorrect, she appears to have gotten the brunt of that blame from us. But again, the story is still even further complicated. 90% of black women who voted for her. 80% of black men who voted for her. So we still supported her. We still, on some level, understand that having her and other blacks in those offices is ultimately better than what we used to have in those offices in past decades. I hope that made some sense. But there's a broader history here, and it's complicated. Her record is complicated as a DA. She's not a progressive, and she's not a reformer, but she has done some things that were reform minded. And then she has done some things that were not. And then she pivoted to a different position in the wake of George Floyd. And now that we're dealing with the backlash against any reform to the criminal justice system, and you knew that was only going to last for a little while, right?
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
were only going to talk about reforming the criminal justice system for a little while before the white backlash happened.
Yes.
Um, so she's had to pivot back, and you saw her during her campaign talk about being a tough prosecutor. Well, that didn't play in 2020. And God knows if she runs again in 2028, I don't, it'll probably be another position.
Hmm.
She's complicated.
So let's get into it. Where exactly did the Democratic Party go wrong with this election?
So, I was searching for some perspective on that myself, and I saw the Reverend Wiiliam Barber, as you mentioned. He was down at
Mm-hmm.
Stanford University this past week, gave a couple of talks. He has, for those who don't know, for several of the past decades, he has picked up on the agenda of Dr. King's Poor People's March
Okay.
and had the Moral Mondays piece. He's tried to assert a moral politics that for him is centered in a revolutionary decolonizing Christ who was likely a dark-skinned Palestinian Jew living under the power of the Roman Empire and who
Mm-hmm.
was born into poverty. And so William Barber's entire call is around addressing poverty. What he pointed out, and I agree with him, is that the Democratic Party spoke to the middle class. Kamala Harris spoke to the middle class. And a lot of us are asking, where is the middle class?
I've been asking that the whole time.
Am I in the middle class?
Right.
Um, where can I see the middle class again? Right? And furthermore, shouldn't we be speaking about the working class and poor? So, roughly a third of this country is poor. In fact, what's so interesting about 2024 is that I saw a map of people who voted for Harris, people who voted for Rump, and people who didn't vote. And if people who didn't vote were a candidate, people who didn't vote would have won in 2024. And a lot of those people who didn't vote are poor, or they are that new category of persons that we have, working poor. In other words, you are working multiple jobs and
Mm-hmm.
still can't get by
Yeah.
because obviously wages have not risen to meet inflation. And the track that the wealthy have been on since the Reagan era has far outpaced the track of working people. I mean, if you just track the movement of the minimum wage versus wages and certainly investments and property for the wealthy, there's no comparison. The minimum wage, and wages have been flatlining for people since the Reagan era. So why didn't the Democratic Party speak to this? And this goes back to, I think, what the Democratic Party did in 2016, where it said, Bernie Sanders, no,
Yes,
we're not doing
I
that.
remember. Yeah,
Yeah, we're not doing that. That was a mistake. Now, maybe, look, if you're going to reject Bernie, and I didn't see any cause to reject Bernie, but if you're going to reject Bernie, his agenda was valid. Working people, working poor, and poor. So we are, especially in places like where you and I live, we are talking about people who have jobs, but are one paycheck away from being in the streets. That's
yes,
what we're
quite a
talking
few
about.
people.
Yeah, we're
Yes,
not just talking about, they keep saying this in the media. We're not just talking about the fact that eggs or beef or chicken or gasoline has gone up. We are talking about one paycheck away from being on the streets. Well, the Democratic Party could have spoken to that. In fact, there were
yes.
things that happened during the Biden administration that maybe should have been better highlighted around protections for working people, for unions, stuff like that,
Hmm.
lowering costs for prescription drugs, etc.
Well, a
That
lot
could
of
have.
people blame the Democratic Party for the inflation and for what the economy is.
Sure, and part of that is because the Biden administration deficit spent its way out of COVID. And you were not, first of all, you're not going to get, I wish the American people understood economics a little bit better, but prices are not coming down. I hate to tell people that. Prices aren't coming down. The rate of inflation has slowed, but prices will continue to rise. It's just that the rate of them has been slowing down. What you're looking for are wages to rise to meet the rising costs due to inflation, and wages have not risen. And so that's why you are feeling what you are feeling. But tell me a time in history that you've experienced, or just in your lifetime that you've experienced, where prices have come down substantively. I mean,
I
you can't,
can't say that I have. I haven't.
it's not happening. I know Trump promised it, but if you're paying like we are out here, 4.79 for a gallon of gas, yes, we are paying that in Northern California. If you're paying 4.79 for a gallon of gas, maybe it'll come down to 4.50. 4.25 would be a blessing, but it's not coming back down to what, $1.89? Is that what you expect? That's not happening.
And that's crazy because I remember the first acclamation of resetting the economy. And this is going to sound it's going to sound kind of minute, but the first time that I saw that the way we spend money, the value and cost of things was a pair of Jordans. I was in high school when the Jordan tennis shoe first came out. That was the first $100 shoe that
Yeah,
had ever hit the market ever.
yeah,
And who would have thought that in 2024, from 1987 to now, that the price of shoes, the common price of shoes, would be anywhere between $150 to $200. Now I'm a sneakerhead. I play a lot of basketball, and I'm acclimated to paying those type of prices. The same thing with the economy. Like here in Atlanta, we got a major thing going on with price gouging with the rent.
right.
So, like even a one bedroom apartment, and I know this is nothing compared to California, but a one bedroom apartment in Atlanta, especially in an area, upper echelon area, is $2,000, and you may not even have the square footage prior that could have gotten you a two bedroom for almost $500 less. So the question of it is it ever a possibility that the inflation, the cost of living, can be marginalized? Can that happen, or is it that simply that either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party just simply that's just something that's not supposed to be? You always want to have a class, or do they always want to maintain a class of the working poor and maintain the filthy rich?
Yeah, well, the thing is that the fix is in. With the reason why you have the system that you have is that the fix is in with the wealthy who overinvest in elections, and who now, you're seeing this with Elon Musk in particular, right? Who now are involved in advising on decision making. So you
Mm-hmm.
have oil people who are there in the energy sector, or with the Energy Commission, and you have other people who buy in to get access to these folks to guide policy. You and I are not in the spaces where policy is being made, where there's pork. You and I are not, I don't know if everybody knows this, but there's a time of year where there's a rail line that runs along the East Coast, and there's a time of year where they put all the people from Congress on this train, and the people who are on that train with them are lobbyists for corporations. And they get, this is not the only time that they get a chance to speak with them. They're at parties with them, they're golfing with them, they're in their ear, they're writing up a lot of these bills and adding things to these bills. You and I don't have that access. And as long as that fix is in, structurally, there will always be a bent towards tax cuts and favors for the wealthy. And it's not just tax cuts either. It's things like farm subsidies, which allow McDonald's to kind of keep their prices where they are, but even the cost of McDonald's has gone up. And not
Yes.
only has it gone up, but their burgers are smaller than they used to be when we were children, right?
I just talked about this the other day when they used to
Yeah.
come in those phone boxes. But are we looking? Are we looking at a possible resetting of all families and people getting what they call the universal income? Something that there was a candidate, man, a couple of years ago. I think he was running. He wasn't a nominated candidate for the Democratic Party, but I think this is the first time Biden ran. His name was
Yeah.
Andrew Yang, and a
Yeah.
lot of people don't even remember him. But he had an agenda. He had a political agenda of the oncoming world that entailed families being able to survive in the oncoming world of AI, where we know AI right now is literally shifting society and logistics, taking away the human muscle and just putting machinery in there. But he had a plan, but he didn't even get the Democratic nominee. Now, I read some of the policies and things that he had on the table. So do you think that, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but do you
Oh,
think
very.
that universal income is going to become a reality?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about UBI is that you've had two runs at it in American history. The first run at it, I can't give you the date. Someone maybe in the audience can Google this and get it in the chat for us as we're
Mm-hmm.
talking. But the first one was unfortunately killed by Senator Ted Kennedy. It made it to the Senate floor for a vote. This has actually been voted on. And one of the reasons why, well, the reason why Kennedy killed it is because he thought it was too low. So he violated that principle that would later be articulated by Obama, which is that I'm not going to kill or destroy the good in pursuit of the perfect, right? In fact, Ted Kennedy probably should have signed that into law, knowing that you could take a look at periodic increases to the UBI.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to have the perfect amount of money right then and there. You needed to get it in the system. The other time when you have had a run with UBI is with the COVID relief check that you received. That essentially was an experiment in UBI, but without calling it UBI. And it's part of what has helped to, contribute to this inflationary period that we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of spending your way out of COVID. But look, if I was running things, I would have done the same thing. Okay, because
Right.
people were hurting, and you've got to respond to the moment to when people are hurting. They didn't
Right.
call it UBI, but the fact was that was meant to, on some level, provide a little bit of a floor for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think UBI is real because you're facing automation in the country. So as
Yes.
long as automation is taking jobs away, and as long as a lot of us, myself included, can do, there's a lot of work we can do now that's just at home with a laptop, right?
Yes.
Because automation takes care of a lot of other things, and our society is set up a little bit differently. You
Yeah.
might need to have UBI because if you can't do what you and I are able to do with a laptop to generate money and an income for ourselves, then, and there aren't manual labor or blue collar jobs available for you in your region, then we're going to have to do something more for you than just expect you to pitch a tent under a freeway overpass.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that
I think it's
that
like
is
it's like
morally correct.
Yes, it kind of reminds me of that movie because I'm literally starting to materialize and understand the resetting of society. There was a movie that was out years ago. I think it was Bruce Willis. It was called Surrogates, where the human body stayed at home and like an artificial of themselves went out into society. It went to work. It drove cars. It serviced in the industry. Now you know they call it predictive program because a lot of this stuff we just thought was just simply entertaining sci-fi when actually it's becoming a real reality in society today. And I'm just trying to figure out how politics is going to govern the way the world is going to have a paradigm shift to where we are looking at. I just don't understand what will life look like, especially for my children. I have a young daughter, so I always try to put her on the path of try to calibrate, at least estimate what life is going to look like and what she needs to be entailed in. And kind of like how you say how most people are working from home, pretty much with the way AI is going to be entailed, these kids are going to have to learn how to operate AI, computers, robots to do the things that we've always been able to do. I know a couple of years ago, Amazon was making a pitch for people to invest in drone technology, and
Right.
I've even seen that Amazon distribution buildings where a drone literally goes to the top of the building and retrieves the package and it delivers it. While at the same time, there's a person literally sitting at home on their couch watching ESPN, controlling the drone and programming the coordinates to deliver the package. So I think that's the world and the society that we're looking at, and I think that people are not paying enough attention to it. As far as mainly in our community, and then also try to figure out how, like you were saying earlier, like we're going to talk about integrate certain things that could prevent poverty. So I want to get into the um when you was talking about the inspirational words of Reverend Wiiliam Barber and how it impacted you when he was talking about the Poor People's Campaign
Yeah.
that he
Yeah.
picked up from Martin Luther King. I want you to go a little bit deeper into that. And what was it about it that really just clicked in you?
So, it's part of a moral movement in his view that has a lot of different components. One, it's in his view, and I would agree with him, it's
Mm-hmm.
rooted in what Christianity would be if we thought of it in a non-European revolutionary sense.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very much in this country. In this country right now, there is a form of heretical Christianity that's kind of getting forced on people in these states that are forcing the teaching of the Bible alongside of uh, the other subjects. Reading, writing, and arithmetic, three R's, um, as they used to say. Um, it kind of returns you to understanding what real Christianity is about in terms
Mm-hmm.
of us thinking about our neighbors. It also takes away that kind of racialized view of how we think about the world. So one of the things I was inspired by in his discussion was his detailing of different communities that he had been to over the years that are poor, that candidates don't visit, by the way. So we are talking about, as we know, the overwhelming amount of people who are poor in this country are white. That is not the image that is given to us. Okay, we are
Mm-hmm.
given images of people of color, black or brown, um, in some cases, very specific groups of people like Haitians in Springfield, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are poor and who are taking from the system. But the overwhelming majority of people who are poor in this country are white. Now, what he talked about was coming to these communities and talking to people beyond the issues of race, which they always fall for. So they always fall for these dialogues of, hey, the reason why you're poor is because of these black or brown people or these gay people or these transgender people or whatever, some other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, we've been at this since 1619, at one another's throats. It is the reason why still has validity in this country, even though it is scientifically inaccurate. It still has cultural validity because it's constantly manipulated for us to believe that my pain is that person's fault, when in
Mm-hmm.
fact there's a system that he talks about that manipulates racial dialogue while other people are cashing in. This is really more about class than it is about anything else, and about a small group. of, you may call them oligarchs if you want to, who are controlling our economy, for to whom most of the wealth goes, and who are also controlling our politics in this country while we fight amongst one another. So part of his movement is about going in and speaking to that. We need a political party, a workers' party. If it's not going to be the Democratic Party, some kind of a workers' party that will speak to that at that higher moral level of how we are all going to live together as human beings in this country and have clarity about what is happening systemically, what is really happening systemically. Where is the money actually going? Why is it, for example, in California, that we have a handful of people in Silicon Valley who literally have more wealth than whole towns and cities of individuals?
Mm.
We have come to that wealth distribution in this country. And yet we still sit around and say, hey, the reason why I'm struggling wherever I am here is because of these Mexicans or these blacks or these gays or these trans people. That's not where the money is going. And he's not, keep in mind, he's not talking specific. He's very careful to not talk about, because this is a nonviolent movement, to not
Hmm.
talk about so much taking wealth from people in some form of a violent revolution. But what he is talking about is changing a system. There's
Now
a
you speak of my language.
you are talking about things like what you were mentioning, UBI, a different tax code. The tax code completely needs to be changed. And it's not just the amount of money that you pay in taxes, but it's also about where your money, where your tax money is going. If you think about this, like I teach in the California State University system,
Hmm.
uh, it's just in tuition alone. It's about 6,600 to 7,000 over the course of a year for the average student, and we're not talking about living and other expenses that come along with going to school. We're just talking about your tuition, right?
Hmm.
Okay. But when I was young, it was essentially free. That's a tax
Yeah.
that's been placed on you because there is a tax base that is supposed to be paying for that state university system. So if I've got to pay tuition on top of that, and that's rising, like for example, they just I guess it was earlier this year, imposed a 43% hike to be phased in over 5 years. Excuse me,
That's
34% hike, 34% hike to be phased in over 5 years for California State University students. That's a tax,
that's a hell of a tax.
right? I mean, that's how I experience it. If I can't get my child into a reliable and good public school, that's a tax. If
Hmm.
I don't have access to either free or affordable preschool, that's a tax.
Isn't this something the Trump administration is going after?
Well, not that I know of. I know that we're going to get, I'm just going by past performance. He promises a lot of things to the working class to be able to move the working class to vote for him. But we got tax cuts for the wealthy the last time, the largest tax cuts for the top income earners, and not just income earners, but also people who don't work for a living, but who earn their living off of investment income,
So how
which
was all that?
always goes up.
How is the tax situation, the tax code is going to work if he does what he's trying to do with the Board of Education? He's talking about replacing it, removing it, and pretty much just rehashing the whole system as far as how that operates. So how does that work in that aspect?
Yeah, does he? Do you know what the plan is? I don't know what the
I
plan is.
actually don't know what the plan is. There
I
was
mean,
a certain thing, depending on who he appoints, but I absolutely have no idea what the plan is. And I can't always take social media seriously. There's like little video clips of him saying certain things, like he wants to remove. I know they was talk. I know affirmative action is dead in the water. Intuition, who's going to be able to receive intuition. The things that are taught in school, if school systems are found to be doing this and that and the third, they'll be held in account, citations filed, and penalization. Things of that nature. That I did hear clips of him talking about. So if that is the case, then how does that change the game as far as the tax code, based on the aspect of education and people needing tuition and student loans? How does that change the game in that aspect?
I don't know, but I know that as you and I are recording this podcast, he has asked former World Wrestling Entertainment CEO Linda McMahon to serve as education secretary.
Oh my god.
Is that the plan? Okay, if that's the plan, then tell me how that's going to benefit me if I'm a working person trying to come up and trying to have my children come up
Mm.
through public education in America. What are we doing?
Well, let me ask you this: as far as the future of education in America, how different is that going to look when we have to? I always talk a lot about AI. We have to consider the reality of AI. How much education will one need when we're literally going to have robots doing everything that humans have done forever? What
Yes.
education will we need, or will we need, or will education be realigned into understanding how to work AI?
So here's the thing that you're always going to need. And I think you're seeing we are where we are because we are losing this. Okay. What you're going to need is you're going to need citizens who can think critically and ethically and morally. And I'm not talking about religion. Okay. When I say
Mm-hmm.
moral, I'm talking about the way that we treat one another in the society and the way that we uplift human personality in the society and respect one another, right? This is King's definition of the just versus the unjust law. The unjust law being a law that does not fit with the moral code of uplifting human personality, right?
Okay.
So you are still going to need people who can think critically. This is what you need when we all go to the ballot box to vote. Think critically. In order to be a fully participating citizen of a society, you have to have that faculty. Think ethically. So we're talking about AI. What are the ethical implications of AI? We have technologies. We didn't even really think about the ethical implications of the internet before we put it out there and threw ourselves into it. But you
Mm.
have to do those kinds of things.
That's a
You
great point.
you have the technology, but you still have to go about thinking about these things. It's kind of like the thing that we all got when we were in school. If you were the black kid who sat in the back of the room and was always pissed and would always look at the teacher and say, "Well, that's not what my daddy told me," right? I was that
Yeah.
kid. Okay, I know you were that kid too.
Yeah.
Remember
And my
when the
daughter.
Right. Remember when you had that day in school and your teacher said, "Hey, when they made the cotton gin, that made life easier on slaves," right?
Yeah.
And you said, "What?" What I learned from my mama and my daddy, thinking critically, was that the cotton gin was a piece of technology that didn't make enslaved persons' lives easier. It
Mm.
made their lives harder because it demanded more cotton coming from the fields to feed the machine. And the truth is that the internet and our computers have not actually made our lives easier in the way we thought they were going to make them easier.
That's a great point. That is a great point. I
And
never
so
looked at it like that.
yeah, so one has to have a society of people who can think through the ethics and the practical applications of how these kinds of technologies are going to impact our society. Some things will be mixed in terms of the judgment. They will be both good and bad. but you have to think through them. And that's really the role of being educated. People talk about all the time having an education that you can take to the bank. You can go and you can get a job with the education. But you know what? You need to think in this society. You've always needed that. And that is what we need if we're going to evolve as human beings and get to the next stage. How do we get past how do we get to post-racialism if we can't think?
Yeah.
I mean, that there's another consideration.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hopeful that we can. We ain't quite there yet, but I'm hopeful that we can because, like we said before we came on, I'm attached to results. I'm
Right.
simply about results, and whatever can solve the problem, whatever the situation may be, especially in the domain of politics, it's all about results. And the deeper I study history and politics, not to go too deep down this rabbit hole, I'm starting to put the dots together as to why certain things happen historically to certain candidates. Certain things that didn't go through as far as bills and policies, because there's always in a set agenda. Like you said earlier, the fix has always been in. And but I'm hopeful because universal law says whatever people put together, people can pull apart. And you're going to have that thinker that's going to rise from the phoenix, and they're going to be able to crack the code on a lot of things to be able to figure out a system and how these things are operating. Now, there's a young man who's going to be releasing a game-changing app 2 weeks from now. I can't spill the beans. I will contact you in person and let you know about it.
I appreciate
But when
that.
this app catches fire, because it is literally a game changer, it will be a way that he will be shut down as well too. Especially because it could change people's lives financially. But you're just putting it out there, you know what I'm saying? And this kid he's a young man, he's a Nigerian, so that's just something. And the reason why I bring him up is because you got people who are geniuses that are thinking critically to solve problems for the everyday hardworking men and women that impact our lives within close proximity. Like we said earlier, all people want is just their fair share in life, the ability to live autonomous, to enjoy family, to enjoy the fruits of the labor. I can recall back in the day when you had a job, you had enough to pay bills, save money, and then still enjoy life. And like you say, now we've been acclimated and kind of realigned as a society, as a people, that all we do is we just go to work, just to pay bills, which I think a lot of times makes an individual fatigue. But that's just me. But I want to get into a little bit more of your history, how you came up, when did the light come on for you? You've been in studies, Black scholar studies, for 25 years now. When did you first get started? How old were you when the light came on you and just clicked to you that this was the type of work that you wanted to do?
That's a good question. It wasn't originally when I came out of college, I was going to be a lawyer, and I did a year of law school, and then somewhere in the middle of that, I decided that I really wanted to be a scholar, and I suppose the light kind of came on there. I had a two amazing experiences when I was in college. So I went to University of Chicago during the Harold Washington administration when
Mm-hmm.
Chicago had its first black mayor, and I studied political science in that context. And so being around that and watching Black Power build in the city was interesting. I can tell you that I remember a day when I looked around in the city and I all of a sudden noticed the pride that Black Chicagoans were feeling around, we have a Black mayor and he just got reelected, and
Mm-hmm.
we are running things and our companies are getting government contracts, and we're in right now, right? We don't just have to take it from the white ethnic machine, right? We are
Mm-hmm.
running. And then the other two experiences that were life changing for me that planted a seed were I met James Baldwin in his final year of life. He came to my
Mm.
campus. That was life changing. And also, I met Amiri Baraka, who I later had the chance to thank. He came a few years ago to Cal State East Bay during our Black graduation and spoke. And I finally had a chance to come up to him and say, I saw you when I was in college. Uh, it was I was deeply influenced by you.
Mm-hmm.
Read everything that you wrote after I met you. So it was Baldwin, and Amiri Baraka, and also watching Harold Washington build Black Power in one of America's greatest cities.
As far as Chicago.
As far as Chicago, yeah, this
Yeah.
happened for Atlantans. You know, like my wife is.
Mm-hmm.
I was telling you, my wife, a Spelman grad, experienced this with in Atlanta around building
Mm-hmm.
power around Maynard Jackson.
Yeah,
That
Maynard
is that.
Jackson.
That's something to be someplace,
Yes.
and we're not just talking about what we could do. We're doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this has happened in a variety of cities throughout this country where we've had a sense of what it could be like if
Yes.
we had a black administration that was black forward, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
knew how to build black power from the streets. When I was in Chicago, I was walking one day on the street. Keep in mind, I was registered to vote in California,
Mm-hmm.
but I was stopped in the street by a young man who was a member of the Black Disciples gang, and he said, "Are you registered to vote?" This is a street gang member. He says, "Are you registered to vote?" And I said, "I'm not registered to vote here." And he said, "I want you to get in this building down the street, and I want you to register to vote."
Mm-hmm.
So I went in, I registered to vote, changed my registration, Illinois. Um, and then when I voted, another Black Disciples gang member was outside of the polling place. And he said to me, "Do you know how you're going to vote?" Okay. You know, this is Chicago. Okay.
Yeah.
So they don't play around. What I realized was that Harold Washington had built a Black organization that ran from the street gangs all the way up to the elite fundraiser parties. And
Yes.
because he had also served in the House of Representatives, he had been a congressman. I later learned that when he was asked to run in Chicago, he told his black constituents in the area, he said, "I will not run for mayor of Chicago. I will come and we will win, but I will not run." So let's not talk about running. We're talking about winning only. And unless you have an infrastructure for me to win, we're not talking about running. That doesn't make any sense. And so he came and he built this power that it was complete. It was throughout the city. I was really impressed with that as a college student, and I would go to city council meetings. I knew a couple of the bars that he frequented. I couldn't afford to drink anything beyond one beer at the bar. But I show up, you know what I mean? Put on my
Yeah.
best clothes that I had, you know, show up, do my
Yeah.
thing, you know, pretend like I belonged, you know?
Yeah. I know that's right.
Yeah,
I think that's very interesting because um when you bring up about the gangster disciple, and I try to teach these young guys, because in the first chapter of the book that I wrote, it was called "They Were Gangsters." I think it's I'm sorry, that's in the second installment when it comes to fatherhood. But I have a chapter called "They Were Gangsters," and I know a lot of times when we use the word gangster, it gets a negative connotation. But I try to give them the context of time and era. In that time and era, street gangs were actually formed for
right.
community control, community protection. You know, especially like in California, from California. You know, I always tell people like Raymond Washington, Tukey Williams, Senyaka, Cody Monster Shakur. I've studied these guys,
Yeah,
and they originally formed the gangs for spook hunters in California to keep the white gangs out the black neighborhoods. And that CRIP was originally, the acronym for CRIP was Community Revolution in Progress. So I
right.
try to tell guys, gangsters were not originated to destroy one another. Gangsters, man, came together because there was a trauma that produced a need, in
That's
which
right.
a lot of times that's where purpose comes from. But as we know, government infiltration, because I've studied, I read up on the civil rights movement, the Black Panthers, the Peace Stone Rangers, and how the government was sending infiltrating letters, and then all hell broke loose, and then with the induction of drugs coming from the Contras. So we all understand how the movement broke down. But I think that's a very interesting point because if you cross a gangster in the street today, he's on pure ignorance and BS. or he'll
That's right.
kill you, want to fight you, or do something. But in those times, they made sure that every black man was held accountable in that community, and that the women and children were protected, and they did the best that they could until things took a turn for the worse. So I think that story right there, it has a lot of value with me. It resonates with me because I think you're spot on as far as that time and era. Now, I know you. You also, we talked about that you are a property owner, and that you are originally born and raised in San Francisco. You recently transitioned to Oakland. Now, when we were talking before we came on air, you was talking about some things about an experience that you had, and you said that your hometown of San Francisco, it broke your heart. You care to speak on that?
Yeah, San Francisco breaks my heart these days because it's eliminated its black population for the most part. There are very
Mm,
few blacks. In fact, San Francisco has experienced the greatest outmigration of black people of any other city in America. There is no city that has seen this the way that San Francisco has. But of course, every major city has seen something like this. Chicago was 43% black when I went to school there. It's not 43% black
yeah.
anymore. But San Francisco has perfected a thing that I've been calling for years. I don't know if I came up with this or who came up with this, but people speak to this. San Francisco has what I have been calling black culture without black people.
Mm,
So, and they've perfected it. So we have jazz, we have blues, we you can get your ribs. You know, they're not what they were when none of this is what it was
yeah.
when I was growing up. In fact, I find it interesting the way that the tech bros come in and they complain on Reddit and all these other things. I can't get good ribs in San Francisco anymore. San Francisco used to have all kinds of great rib joints, including Nate Thurman's place, the legendary Golden State Warrior, Nate Thurman.
Yeah.
Um, so we had that, but that was when we had black people.
Yeah.
So you can't expect that once you move the people who had migrated from Gulf coastal Texas and Louisiana out of the city, that you're going to still get the taste of good Gulf coastal foods in the city. That's not
Mm,
happening.
yeah.
Uh, that breaks my heart because San Francisco. Not only does San Francisco have a sizable black population, at one point in time, it actually had numerically more blacks than Oakland. Of course, the same process is happening right now in Oakland. It's just Oakland's a little bit behind the rapid gentrification that we've seen in San
Mm,
Francisco, but it is happening. The way that San Francisco did this has probably been played out throughout the country. So what you do is you enact these gang injunctions in neighborhoods. This is a part of the process. I'm not going to be able to give it all to you because there are a lot of different ways this is done. You enact these gang injunctions in which you essentially declare an area to be sort of crime ridden. This is
right.
sort of a parallel process to the other process of eminent domain, where you declare a black area to be blighted. They've done that too. Okay, it's blighted, then you tear up the buildings, and basically, and you force people out. The other way you do this is, and San Francisco's done both. You basically set up a police occupation in the neighborhood. At a certain point in time, people don't want to be there anymore. And of course, the real estate agents are coming to you and saying, look, you've been living rent free in your mama's house that your mama and your daddy sacrificed to get back in the day when they came here from Galveston, Texas. You could sell it right now for a cool 600,000 and move out someplace in the exurbs or suburbs and buy yourself a nice new Cadillac along with it, right? Two-car
Yeah.
garage with a nice new Cadillac. No, it's about a 40-minute commute, maybe an hour and a half commute to get back into the city to go to church because you're going to keep going to church in the city, but you get this cash. Folks move out. They're motivated to move out. Then all
Mm,
of a sudden, you notice when the gang injunctions are lifted and more of these bigger property developers and firms have bought up these locations, all of a sudden now, like in the Bayview Hunters Point, we got a light rail. Oh, we didn't have that before. Oh,
yeah.
now we got, boutique shops. It's like in Harlem, where now you can walk down Malcolm X Boulevard and you got somebody, wearing a fur, and they got their little chihuahua
Yeah.
on a leash. Man, I didn't see that in the 1980s.
Yeah.
They didn't even
Yeah.
have street lights on in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And I got boutique restaurants, and things have been revamped. We've got now, these apartments that are going to cost you $3,000 to $4,000 a month to be in.
Hmm.
But we've also built a new medical center down here, and we got a new ballpark down here too. So it's all of a sudden it's changed, right? So this is what's happened in the city. The city has said wherever we're going to revamp and uplift an area, we're going to make sure that none of the original residents, especially the black residents, are here anymore.
Yes.
We're looking
Yes.
for a new class of people here.
Yeah.
And that breaks my heart.
Yep. Let's say bikes, lane, coffee shops, 2 new ballparks.
Oh, the bike lane, for the person who put that there, they are spot on. The bike lane is your first thing. You see them putting
Hmm.
the bike lanes in. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
We've been biking in this neighborhood for
Yeah.
4 or 5 decades, but really what it is you just cross your fingers that when you send your child out to bike, that they don't get hit by a car, right? There
Yes.
was no lane, okay?
Yeah.
You were in the
Yeah.
street with a sidewalk.
Yeah. And then and not only just in San Francisco, shout out to Chablis. Hopefully she drop in because I know she's experienced. She lives the reality that you're talking about. I believe she's still in San Francisco, but also here in Atlanta they had what they call the Belt Line. This was when I was still doing real estate. I was doing wholesale. So what you spoke about earlier, how they'll call, an inner city elderly lady, people that had homes. Hey, I can. If you want to sell your house, you want to get out of the mortgage or whatever, I can, give you a cash out. You can buy your house. You can get out. They take the money, flip it, and now everything on the Belt Line that used to be somewhat kind of run down, decrepit, deemed a demolition hazard or whatever, a hazardous environment, it's all been revamped. And the first thing I seen down on the Belt Line was bike lanes. Then I
Right.
began to see these exotic coffee shops, not franchise, mom and pops, upscale stuff. No fast food restaurants, hardly no liquor stores. Upper echelon school care and daycare. And so this is actually going on here in Atlanta as well. I know we talked about Harlem. I believe Detroit has gone through something like that. Detroit has lost a lot of its black population. A lot of Detroiters are here in Georgia. It's going on in my hometown of St. Louis, where St. Louis, the north side of St. Louis, was heavily condensulated with a lot of us, and now a lot of them moved out into the Florissant area, the Hazelwood area, all out into St. Charles. So it's going around nationwide. Chicago, I know you mentioned Chicago. Chicago's a heavily segregated city. I never
Yeah.
knew Chicago was 40%, 43% black. I
Yep.
know Atlanta. I would always say Atlanta's gonna be black. But what I see going on, it's a strong possibility Atlanta may not always be black. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I know Atlanta has for a long time been 70, 30, 80, 20% black. But let's not confuse the quantity of numbers of black people here with the level of power.
Yeah.
Because when the Beltline happened and a lot of those white investors got that money, we had a black male mayor in office when this happens. So that's a whole nother part of the game. What you brought about as far as about with the gang thing, now that's new to me, but I believe that. And so it's a sad reality. We have not figured out how to counter this attack, but there's ways that we could do it. But I know, again, people who got to be strategically, people who got to be thinkers, and like you say, they got to be critical thinkers that understand how to crack the codes to solve a lot of these problems. Now, another thing that you were saying is that one of your stories you was telling me about is about when you and your wife you were trying to find properties and space to rent, and that initially was that like the what they say the straw that broke the camel's back that made you transition to Oakland. Tell me a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons why we moved to Oakland. One is that, I have some very good memories here. When I was growing up, my dad understood the rise of black businesses in Oakland, and he was a musician, but he never actually had a career as a musician, although he was trained. He had a master's degree in music, but he became a CPA. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of musicians are good with numbers. He was very good with numbers. So he catered to black businesses in Oakland. So I always had really good memories of Oakland because whenever I was here, it was about getting time to spend time with my dad, who was working really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got married in 1995, my wife and I were looking for a place to rent. We were both working in San Francisco at the time. So we said, well, let's just rent a place in San Francisco. And it was one of those things where time and time and time again, we submit the paperwork, we get a phone call, paperwork, the person is telling us the paperwork looks great, the credit check is fine, boom, boom, boom. Like to come and meet you. So we would meet with them. Then we'd either get ghosted or there'd be a
Wow.
phone call saying, I'm sorry. And then there'd be a reason, right?
Yeah.
There were even a couple of times where we were actually interviewed by a current tenant who would speak highly of us to the owner. Then we meet the owner, and the owner would say they'd come up with some reason, right? So we were
Mm-hmm.
like, you know what, we know what's happening here because what we were doing was we were also looking for places outside of the traditional black neighborhoods. Now,
Mm-hmm.
San Francisco will sell you on liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
Liberals are also racist
Of
too.
course.
Okay. I'm using also and to underscore the point. Okay. Or let me just put it this way: they can be. And so we were looking for places that were outside of sort of the traditional black neighborhoods, which were vanishing anyway in 1995, and just couldn't find it. And then kept running up against what we knew. I mean, you know what it is. Once you've gone through it 5 or 6 times, and it's the same thing each time. But you know what? The sad part about this is that when my parents married in 1960, they had to look through the newspaper in San Francisco for places that explicitly said that they will rent to Negroes
Wow.
in liberal San Francisco. So I basically had the same experience renting in San Francisco or attempting to rent that my parents had. Now I'm also a property owner in San Francisco. But the reason why, and the properties that myself and my sister, our family have, those are the only reason why I have an education. That's it. I
Hmm.
mean, this is really what's at the core of some of the things that you talk about around building. The only thing that makes me any different from anybody who may not have had some of the educational opportunities that I had was that my parents on both sides were able to buy homes outside of the traditional areas that blacks had been zoned for. And one side of the family was able to do this because, for some bizarre reason, the family that owned the home were on vacation and the real estate agent didn't care. So, they got it. And the other one, I'm really not sure how my grandfather got it, but he bought a home in a neighborhood that was German, but then it later became a black neighborhood. The neighborhood is the Ingleside.
The
Um,
Ingleside.
yeah, the Ingleside has become a black. It's near City College, San Francisco. It later then became a black neighborhood, but when he moved in, it was a German neighborhood, and they dealt with a lot of racism. Um, in that particular space. My father, when he was very young, was threatened at rifle point in that neighborhood. But we held on to those spaces. We still have them.
Yes.
So that is the only real hope that you have in this country of acquiring wealth. Because if you can be someplace like in Atlanta or Chicago, in a place, in a neighborhood where your property is going to accrue value, because
Yes.
not all properties accrue value the same way. I take the same house in a black neighborhood or what's zoned as a black neighborhood, that same house, put that in a neighborhood that's zoned white, and they do not accrue value at the same rate.
That's crazy. All because based upon the knowledge. I want to go to this comment by young Mir put in there. He said, "Now with the mayors, when they are black first time, they don't do some. A person wants to badmouth them and don't vote for them again." And then they also said, "Now that's the real shit ever. San Francisco is the most racist city in America." And I believe they had another comment they had put up here earlier. says that oh, sorry about that. No one of those. No, I'm one of those that never sold because I own until now, but I have been replaced out of Bayview Hunter Point, excuse me, low income houses. Once you're employed, you can't save.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm assuming, is that an area in San Francisco, or are they talking about Chicago?
Yeah, no, the Bayview Hunters Point is a one of the two. There's really three traditional black neighborhoods in San Francisco. The
San
one is the
Francisco.
Bayview Hunters
Okay.
Point. The other is the Western Addition slash. Some people just call it the Fillmore. And sometimes people think of the Hayes Valley, which is where my mother first moved when she came to the city as a
Hmm.
traditional black neighborhood.
Indeed, indeed. So let me ask you this: is there a need for black people who are still in San Francisco to still maintain a presence? And if so, why?
There's a need for black people to maintain a presence in every major city in America. And the reason for that is because these are where the centers of wealth and capital are in the United States of America. This is where the action is. Now, I'm not disparaging small towns and farms. The truth is, as Black people, we have been everywhere because we have had to be everywhere. We can't be out of the dialogue anywhere. So the Black experience has been urban and it has been rural and everything in between. But particularly when you see how concentrated capital and wealth are in our metropolitan areas, you have to be there.
Understood. Yeah, I think San Francisco, out of all the cities that we talk about, I am most shocked about San Francisco. Again, my good friend Chablis is in that area, and she breaks this down eloquently. You all are almost echoing the same thing, and it's something that a lot of people I truly don't believe, unless you're on the West Coast, unless you're in California, you really wouldn't understand the dynamic and the crazy phenomena that's going on right now. So let me ask you this: is there much is the difference since you've moved to Oakland? What are the similarities that you can compare to having once lived in San Francisco, or is there a difference?
So there's not, for me, I see a lot of continuities and overlap, except for one thing. I think that the history of Black people in Oakland sent a ripple effect through the entire country that resulted for a number of years on real dramatic pushback against Black people here in this town and very
Mm,
negative dialogues about people in this town. One of the reasons why I wrote a detective novel, and I'm writing a novel series about the city of Oakland. The first book is called The People's Detective. The reason why I'm doing that is because I'm attempting to um, to re-examine the history of Black people in this town and the value of Blackness in this town. This is the space that produced the Black Panther Party for self-defense. That is
yes.
a significant contribution to American history. However flawed any of it might have been, uh, the reason why you have a children's breakfast program right now is because of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The reason why you have relevant education is because of that party too. Also, keep in mind that my discipline, ethnic studies, started in this region. It started at San Francisco State. That's the first ethnic studies program in the country. So we have made significant contributions that have been very scary in terms of decolonizing this
Hmm.
country for Black people. That's what I love about being here. There is a spirit here. And I will tell you, I don't want to give anything away about the stuff that I'm writing about in the novel. The novels will all deal with very real problems that are happening now and how Black people, ordinary Black citizens, might be trying to solve them. And each of the novels will go into some or many aspects of Oakland history. For
Hmm.
example, one of the things that I get into in The People's Detective that people do not know is that in the 1920s, Oakland was ruled by the Ku Klux Klan. And the Klan was strong enough here that it was even able to be influential in gubernatorial politics. They got their governor appointed in the state of California. Now, there's a lot more to the history of Oakland that I explore in each book. I'm currently writing the second book, which deals with the crisis of the unhoused here. Then the third book will deal with the manufacturing of a crime wave. What you are seeing right now in Oakland in order to drive further gentrification. It's the same thing that happened in San Francisco, is you're seeing the manufacturing of a crime wave. And I don't care if you're on what they used to call Twitter. I refuse to call it anything else, but I'm not on it anymore because of that idiot. Or Facebook or Instagram, or if you're listening to podcasts, you are hearing Oakland is one of the worst places to live in America. It's on the list of the top 10, right? Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter where you go. But answer this for me. Why is it okay? I moved back after the mortgage crisis. I needed a couple of 10 years to repair my credit. We moved back in 2018. Since 2018, why is it that my house has accrued almost $300,000 in value? Why is it that there's a 40-story luxury tower in downtown Oakland right now for the wealthy? Why is that happening? Why are we also voted California's culinary capital with some of the more interesting and diverse restaurants in all of California, right here in Oakland, California? Why is that happening? Why? Just look at the first one. Why are property values continuing to rise astronomically in a city that's supposed to be one of the worst cities to live in? And I'll grant you, our politics are crazy. You know, we just got rid of our mayor. We got rid of our county district attorney, who was a progressive district attorney. That's going to be a complete shit show. Okay, getting a new mayor. We went
Mm.
a year and a half without a chief of police under the mayor we just kicked out. We got a whole messed up system that's really city administrator run and not strong mayor. It's crazy, okay?
That's
But
exactly everything Chablis says. I'm listening.
why are property values rising if this is such a shitty place to live? Somebody wants to live here. That's the only reason why property values go up. Why is it a feeding frenzy every time a house becomes available? I got houses in my neighborhood. They go up on a Sunday. The next Sunday, I'm seeing sale pending.
Oh,
Why?
wow.
Why? So what's happening is they're moving you out. They're moving you out. And they're moving you out under this whole dialogue of the streets are dirty, there's homelessness, and all of that is true. There's crime, although crime has dropped off, and we haven't had a murder for about a month and a half now, which
In
is good.
Oakland?
Yeah, man. I mean, the murder rate has been a thing, but lately it's been okay. Okay, I don't want to
So
jinx it. Okay.
right, I hear you. But back in San Francisco, just so I'm clear, the mayor is Chinese in San Francisco, correct?
No, the current mayor of San Francisco is black.
Really?
London Breed, yes, but she has
Okay.
put together a coalition. She just was voted out, by the way. She got voted out by the heir to the Levi Strauss fortune. He bought
Okay.
his way in, and
Okay.
he's bringing in a lot of tech executives to advise him in his transition. But London Breed is a black woman. She grew up in the Bayview Hunters Point, but she's smart. She put together, in a city that doesn't have blacks, she put together a largely non-black coalition.
Hmm. I think Chablis told me about that. Matter of fact, let me go to
Mhm.
this is actually her. She just confirmed it. She said, and Ingleside is now Chinese. Whatever we have in major cities like San Francisco, we can't sell. We have to figure out a way to rent, use Section 8 and all. This is me just under my son's account. And then also she says right here, Bayview homes are millions easy best weather in San Francisco is bought his way in. She grew up in Fillmore. So
Okay.
shout out to Chablis. Thank you for chopping in. She's
Yeah.
definitely right there. She's in the thick of things. We talk about this all the time, and she gives me a lot of the information, some of the same stuff. That's why right
And by
now
the way,
San Francisco is intriguing to me.
and
Mm,
she's right here in the one post that she puts where she says, Oakland still has better black spirit and energy, especially with the Black Panther Party. She's spot on with that.
Oh yeah. I
That
mean,
that's
born and raised. I'm surprised I don't know each other.
Yeah, that's 100%, and that's one of the things that I love about being out here. That energy is
Hmm.
it's gone
Yes.
in San Francisco. It's absolutely gone. It used to be there. It was
Yeah.
there when I grew up, but hey, look, there was a city that you could go down to Fillmore, and there was a serious Juneteenth parade.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oakland definitely has a serious. It has a serious culture. I mean, I've yet to get to Cali. I'm a Sacramento Kings fan. I know it's ironic. People are like, how do you become a Kings fan? I just like the Kings. And when I do make that trip, I'm going to hit a few cities. San Francisco is going to be one of them. Oakland, definitely Sacramento, and probably Los Angeles. So I'll probably spend like a good month in Cali. My son actually lives in San Diego, but
okay,
I know California is just as critical as a state as Ohio.
yeah,
And I was shocked that California went blue during the election. But I know that even with the stuff that's going on in San Francisco, I know that San Francisco has some serious black people with some serious intelligence. Chablis is one of them. Like I said before we went on, she's a part of a coalition of women that are doing some great things as far as on the economic side of things, empowering not just black women, but just people in the community as well too. So having you on the show tonight gives way much more greater introspect to help me understand. And the reason why I constantly talk about this, because this is happening in every major city where there are a lot of black people, and the demographic has changed. As far as the areas where we once existed, they're now white. Just like when they said years ago, I think when Bill Clinton was still in office, Harlem was going white and nobody believed it. But when you go to Harlem now, Harlem looks nothing like it did like back during
yeah,
obviously the
go
Harlem Renaissance,
yeah,
Brooklyn, areas like this. So it's a sad thing, man. But there's always a way that you can always say, even in a loss, there's a win. You understand? And sometimes with the situations that's taking place, as far as with us as a people, it induces certain things to where we come out great. We still find a way to come out on top, which is the beauty of us as a people. But now, getting into what you was talking about with the detective novel, I want to get into the books, man. I told you I purchased the Podcaster's Dilemma. There's a lot of stuff in this book, man, that was beneficial to me as a podcaster. But I know I want to talk about in the book on page 81. I'm gonna put the entry on the screen on page 81. You said counter narratives are different from dominant narratives in that they originate from the perspectives of those who have been historically marginalized and exploited. Can you kind of speak on that a little bit to kind of help give me context and understand what exactly you were saying in that particular entry?
Okay, so this is why you have a podcast, because you
Mm,
are a decolonizing podcaster. You're one of the people that we are thinking about here. And we didn't survey everybody, but you are one of the people, and you may not have had the podcast when we actually started writing this book, but you're
mm,
one of the people that we're thinking about. So there are everything that we have talked about up to this point about the long history, and there are things that we still haven't talked about that come before, like the 80s and the 90s, right? In terms of trying
mm,
to remove black folk, but everything we've talked about around black urban life in places like Atlanta, San Francisco, Oakland, Chicago, all the places we've talked about, um, those are counter narratives. And they're counter narratives because if I turn on legacy media, ABC, NBC, CBS, or if I go to cable, CNN, MSNBC, which comes out of the NBC legacy network, okay? God forbid, something like Fox or something like that. I will never hear that. I can
yes.
listen for 50 years and I will not get a discussion about the systemic removal of black people from urban areas. Once white people decide to move back, okay? I will not get that discussion. So that's a counter narrative. And what I also mean by this is that counter narratives reinsert marginalized people back into the center of the dialogue. So what you will get often is a dialogue to which we are on the margins. Think
Mm,
about the way that they discussed whether black men were going to vote for Kamala Harris or not. They did it without really talking about black men at all,
Yes, they did.
because they didn't really talk about the needs of black men. They didn't do something that they could have done, which is, if the discussions are happening in barbershops, go ahead and spend time in barbershops and ask somebody, and ask somebody else, and ask somebody else. You had elites speaking on behalf of black men. And half
Yes.
of these people who were speaking on behalf of black men probably hadn't talked to a brother in a long time,
Yes.
unless they were brothers, okay?
Yeah.
And even they may not have, okay? Right?
Yeah,
So,
I know that's
so,
right.
so we weren't really at the center of a dialogue that seemed to be about us.
Yes.
Because guess what? It wasn't really about us. It just seemed like it was.
I know
Okay.
that conversation called a ripple effect in our, because the narrative that came out was, well, black men, Trump won because black men didn't vote for Kamala Harris, and I'm like,
And
that's
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 not
clearly
true.
not the truth.
That's not what happened. In fact, what happened was that white women did what they've always done, which is they couldn't vote for a woman of color. White
Hmm.
women who had the most to lose, or as much to lose as anybody else, especially around women's reproductive rights, ultimately said, I got two cards. I got the woman card and I got the white card. And they decided, I'm going to play that white card,
Hmm.
because that's the card that they've always played. They've never been hand in hand with black women. There have been
Exactly.
very rare alliances between white feminists and black feminists
Yeah,
historically.
and the numbers showed that they did not turn out at the polls to vote for Harris, as well
They'll
as the
always
Brown
let you
vote.
know. Yeah, they'll always
You
let you
know.
know.
Exactly. And so moving forward, man, there was another entry where I need to get clarification, because you have some interesting terms. It says several areas of the street counter narrative production: neoliberalism, race, patriarchy, gender binaries, heteronormativity. Normativity. I hope I pronounced that right. And
Normativity, you
set.
got
Okay,
mhm.
cool. Settler, monogamy, ableism, and popular culture. Now, two of those terms I've never heard of before: heteronormativity and settler monogamy. What exactly are those terms?
Okay, so when we talk about normativity, we're talking about a standard man, woman producing children. Okay,
Mm.
that's the norm, the normative,
Oh,
and
okay,
and
okay.
people try to replicate this all the time. So you
Mm.
even have a world in which gay couples try to reproduce heteronormativity as well. So,
Mm.
you know, you may get the gay couple who says, "Hey, we're also looking for the white picket fence, the two children, the dog, the car, and whatever, just all of the trappings of Mayberry RFD or whatever it is, whatever, idea we have in our heads
Right.
about two-person house, yada." There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But what I am suggesting is that you are reproducing a structure, and the structure that you're reproducing has been one that has been very central to white male power. You
Yes.
heard JD Vance talking about this kind of thing when he critiques uh childless cat ladies. He is critiquing women who are not falling in line with the heterosexual norm. Get married, pop out kids. Stay married. No matter what the situation is,
Mm-hmm.
stay married, raise the kids, make the sacrifices, and die. That's your life, baby. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. As far as the other term, settler monogamy, it's related to heteronormativity. One of the things that we really don't want to look at is the way that marriage is a business and a financial relationship that undergirds white male patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, women in a patriarchal society produce children, which means that they produce the next patriarch, and they serve as vessels for a man to transfer his wealth between himself and his sons. So their bodies become conduits for transferring patriarchal wealth and power. If I'm the big
Oh wow.
white patriarch who owns the plantation, what am I going to do when I die? I'm not passing it down to my daughters because we live in a patriarchal, male-centered society. I got to keep going till I have sons. You've many women have dealt with this pressure for decades in this country. We got to keep going until we have sons, right? Which, by the way, is not on the onus of the woman. It really has a lot to do with how fast the sperm of the man are moving. So, if his sperm are moving rather slowly and he's producing daughters to whom he's not going to pass down his wealth, then you got to keep going until you produce a son. That is the settler monogamous situation. We tend to think of marriage as a religious thing, but marriage, you get a marriage license with the state, not with the church, with the state, because marriage is an economic state formation. That's why you have a designation on your taxes, single or married. It's a
Yeah.
legal state and economic formation for how we organize wealth in this country. And women, unfortunately, in a patriarchal society, are just instruments of that, of passing that down. Now, it's true that things are changing in this country, right? And there are more and more women who do not feel that pressure to produce children for a patriarch
Mm-hmm.
and who own wealth in their own right and who
Yeah.
pass it down to other women in their own right. But these are very recent changes in our society. What I'm critiquing there with heteronormativity and settler monogamy are the things that we take for granted. And the things that we take for granted are always the most powerful in your life, precisely because you take them for granted and you never question them. And one of those things are the ways that we uh, pair ourselves up, marry, have children, and enforce monogamy. Are those really about the things that we think they're about, like love and fidelity and all these other values? Or are they really about money and
Man, you
patriarchy?
sound like my partner Calvin, man. We talk about this all the time. And it kind of puts a spin, because kind of like when I have conversations with women as far as like in the dating aspect, I want to be married. I want to be married. And I kind of got a conceptualized understanding of what you're saying now that you're articulating it. I remember the late brilliant Dr. Amos Wilson would always talk about if you love somebody, you make it legal. And so a lot of times in having conversations with young women, I'll be like, do you really understand what marriage is? Marriage is not really based upon as far as the aspect of the legal aspect of it. It's not based on emotion. It's not based on love. It's not based on, you want to spend your rest of your life with me, but this is a business. It's the coming together of two estates. So a lot of times, man, it just putting that in context. And I think a lot of times we've been saying things and adapting to things culturally that we really don't understand the pure context of what we're saying, what we want, or what we think it is. Because we understand the true essence of marriage don't always start with a legal document. I think that settling monogamy, man, I think that is that could be triggering to some people, mainly I think women, but that is a damn good point. And I didn't understand what it meant at first because there's a lot of jewels in the book that I read, and even as a podcaster that I told you like before we came on, like I could use these things to supplement to help me as far as my direction moving forward with my subject matters and how to articulate and get things across. But I think that's a great observation on your behalf. The question is now, when you present that one in particular, is it well received by women?
So you have to keep a couple of things in mind. Women can be exploited within marriage structures and exploited outside of marriage structures. It is just as potentially it is just as exploitative to tell a woman, I'm not going to marry you because I have this critique of marriage, as it is to be exploited within a marriage context.
Hmm.
So I am not advocating any particular system. What I'm advocating is a critical perspective on all systems. So when a brother comes up to a sister and says, because I do teach a black sexualities course, when a brother comes
Oh,
up to a
okay.
sister, when a brother comes up to a sister and says, "Okay, I want to do something. different. It's more open, and I got two women and three. Can be terribly exploitative. I mean, people can be hurt in situations like that because there's a cultural expectation of fidelity. Or if you say, you're going to contribute to my life, we're going to live together, and I'm going to basically be able to launch all my dreams because you're here helping me to get to the next stage, but I'm not going to marry you. That can
Mm-hmm.
be an exploitative situation too. So the issue is that you live in a patriarchal society, and almost all formations around relationships can be exploitative to women.
Yes.
These things have to be rethought completely from the standpoint of women's power. Men almost entirely don't belong in the discussion whatsoever. This is sort of the problem that we have with women's reproductive health care. Technically, if we're talking about a woman's power over her own body, men do not belong in the discussion at all.
True. I agree.
We have a stake in the game, but we should not be the primary decision makers on any of that. And yet we are. Why? Because we live in a patriarchal society. That's
Mm.
why. And we are constantly weighing in and creating policy. And women who have been influenced by patriarchal norms and ideas are also weighing in. There are plenty of women who betray their own best interests, just like there have historically always been plenty of blacks who have betrayed the best interests of black people.
Yes.
But we
That is
would
very
hope that
true.
But we would hope that if we look through Black history at particularly at women-led movements, that we can see something different. And I'll give you an example of what happens when you let Black women think autonomously of their own. You get
Mm-hmm.
something like Black Lives Matter, which has been effective. I understand that the movement is split up, and there's a faction of them is something that has kind of taken over the movement and run with it, and so forth and so on,
Mm-hmm.
and made a profit. But I'm talking about the original founders of this movement. That was effective. There
Patrice
was a new perspective that was created out of that, and new laws that were created out of that.
Patrice McCullough is not one of the original founders, is
Yes,
she?
yes,
She
yeah,
is? Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Along with Opal Tometi and Alicia Garza, who I've met out here. We actually were on a panel once together.
Okay. Yeah. There's been a lot of speculation
I
about
know
the secret agenda was really an LGBT agenda, and a lot of the funding and finances was compromised, which um
they're
kind of
queer.
bring right.
I mean, they didn't
Yeah.
hide that. So really, Black Lives Matter is a
Hmm.
queer Black woman's movement. They went into it with that. But
Yeah.
look, my colleague Melina Abdullah is Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. She ran as vice president on the Cornell West Peace and Justice ticket.
Yes.
Melina is one of the most righteous soldiers that I've seen out there. She's been there in LA outside of the jails, raising children, by the way, as a single mother while she does this, and
Hmm.
having being a full time professor and chair at Cal State LA, running a program.
Hmm.
And it's, by the way, she's from Oakland, which tells you something about where that heart comes from, right?
Yeah.
But she's been out there proclaiming the names of folks who get dragged into these jails only to disappear. She'll be out there calling your name. She was out there in front of what's his name, Kevin De Leon's house when they
Hmm.
uncovered the racism on the LA City Council. She's the
Hmm.
reason why De Leon did not win re-election. I mean, she's
Hmm.
a serious soldier. These women have produced results, and this is a queer Black women's led movement.
Yes.
We got results when we had Sojourner Truth.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
indeed.
when you let the sisters do what the sisters need to do, they get stuff done.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I had a good friend, man, years ago. We kind of had a conversation, man, and he was like, "Listen, kind of like what we said earlier. I'm attached to the results. Just stuff like that is minute, it's marginal. But I won't lie to you. When I first kind of got information of it, I just thought that once again, a black agenda has been hijacked by a movement that has nothing to do with what we're trying to achieve and what we accomplish. Because the system first identifies your color before it does sexual orientation. Besides, nobody really knows what your orientation is until it's made known and it's been, you declared it. However, bringing this thing home because I want to get into the detective novel before we wrap it up for the evening. I have
Sure.
to go back to what you talked about, what you said that you teach black sexuality class. That's the first I've ever heard. So what is all entailed in a black sexuality class? And what would you say is the number one confusion when it comes to black sexuality amongst black people?
So that's that last question. Those things have evolved over the years. I've been doing this for 24 years. There aren't many black sexualities courses in the country. Okay.
This is the first I've ever heard of it.
There's a small handful of people who have done them and who are
Okay.
doing them. What we try to do is I try to deal with this class in a broader context of the history of black bodies and of black pleasure. So you can't talk about pleasure and decolonizing the sexuality and being free of whiteness unless you talk about the long history of violence against our bodies. So one of the things that I start students out with is an understanding that rich white male heteropatriarchy really rests upon a history of raping black women and
Mm-hmm.
denying pleasure, specifically from black women, but also black men. We don't talk
Mm-hmm.
about it often, but black men were also sexually violated when we were enslaved. And there's always been an obsession with both the black male and black women's bodies. When they lynch you, for example, they might cut off your penis.
Penis.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they created that notion and they've been long obsessed with it. So you have to get through that very painful history of being considered a thing, a hypersexual thing, before you can really start to talk about how we're going to heal and create healing practices. You also have to talk about Western European relationship structures and dialogues and whether those are the right thing for you. All too often we fall into the just into the regular Western discourses about things. And I see that your uh, friend here has put some stuff. The women's right movement was not the black women's fight. She's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely correct. You could never take that for granted. It's a very different agenda. And if you're
Yeah.
trying to decolonize yourself from whiteness, you have to be able to understand where the women's rights movement was particularly racist and anti-black feminist.
Yes.
But we do talk about black sexual lives, how black people sort of interact with different sexual practices. Lately, I've been using a lot of Adrienne Marie Brown's work, which deals with how you build pleasure, how you build politics and community out of experiencing pleasure, and how black people for so long have had to deny themselves pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Think about like when you're walking in the grocery store and you see a kid who reaches for something and his mama slaps at his hand not to touch it. That kind of behavior in our communities teaches us to pull away from the sensory, right?
Yeah.
Really touching, feeling one another, right? And experiencing our the full extent of our sensuality. In other words, fully living. And you think about the brothers that you know who are in pain,
Mm-hmm.
but can't fully express it, right? Can't
Yeah.
tell you that, can't tell you that they love you without, some deeper implication, being afraid of some other implication, or just simply can't get that out of their hearts because we've been taught to shut that off, right? So, how do we then connect fully with our partners? So, we talk about a lot of things like that. The stuff that my students are dealing with now uh, at East Bay, most of my students tend to be Black women. I have a lot of brothers in the class, but Black women have been the majority of my students in that class, and they are interested in how they can most and best feel powerful sexually. And
Really?
yes, and what that means is if a person has gone through a history of rape or molestation, which is all too common in our communities, how do I get back to feeling without anger,
Okay.
without shame of my own body? How can I get that back? Right? And some of this is multi-generational trauma. It's like maybe I didn't experience that, but my mom did. And I watched it happen to my mom. So then it happened to me too. Or like my book is about sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is out in the open in this region.
You talking
Okay.
about out in California?
Yeah, this part of California is the third biggest hotspot in the country for sex trafficking
I think
because of the
Atlanta's number one, isn't it?
port. If it's not Atlanta, it's certainly around the Miami region. But
Oh, Miami,
Atlanta's
closer
Atlanta's
to the
on that
water.
list. Atlanta's on
Yeah.
that list. Yeah. Yeah, whenever you're kind of near ports, but keep in mind Atlanta is a big transportation hub. This is
It
why
is.
when you fly into Hartsfield Jackson, you have all those signs warning you about the signs of sex trafficking because this also happens in airports and at train stations too. So that puts
Yeah.
Atlanta on that list. So
Yeah.
how do I deal in that context with
Yeah.
developing a healthy sense of sexuality? And my women students are also interested in non-monogamy, but not
What?
but not from the
Not.
perspective of pleasing men, but from the perspective of being pleased and being able to control relationships. So these aren't sisters who are interested in being in your harem where you have several other women. They are interested in having brothers who might meet their various needs. So here's a brother who meets this need. Here's a brother who meets that need. Because what do I do if I can't find one man who can meet all of my needs? And what if I don't just want a man to meet my needs?
That's deep. I recently met a young lady that was kind of like on that level. Like, you know what? I think she believes that you're gonna always be attracted to multiple people. You won't just have one partner forever. Now she's been married. I come to believe. I tend to believe that marriage did her in a little bit. She was a little damaged. It was an abusive marriage, and I think that she's never been allowed to openly express herself sexually with her former ex husband. But at the same time, I think she also has suppressed feelings, sexually, attraction and things of that nature. So I think that's one thing, like you said, it's shifted over time. It
It
constantly
has. Mhm.
transitions. So I think that we are moving. And the reason why, when you brought that up, there's a lot of discussions we have to have in our community because a lot of our people are struggling that the simple fact that the black family that we knew from the 80s, that is not the prototype today. The relationship setups are not the same as they were prior. And there are a lot of women and men who are like, I get married, it's just me and my spouse, and that's good. And I think that's for people who actually have that love for one another to where they are enough. But I know more people on the spectrum of they're open to new ideas, new setups as far as relationship, new ways of raising children. So I
Yeah.
find that to be very, very interesting because a lot of people can't eat that conversation. A lot of men can't deal with a woman that just says exactly what you just said. They can't deal with that type of woman that says, you know what, you can't be just the only guy to satisfy my need. And like you say, it don't always have to do with sex. It could be multiple ways. But at some point, psychologically speaking, at some point, Do you think that people that may feel that way now with this ever growing community and expanded ideas of sexuality and relationships, do you think at some point as they get older and maybe health begins to decline, that then maybe they just want to settle down and be with one individual?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been in a monogamous marriage for almost 30 years. Okay,
Mm.
and I think that
Jerry said, "Build a man."
it's been beautiful to grow old with somebody, to grow older with somebody. I'm not old
Mm,
yet, but I'm growing older. But I will say this, that relationships don't necessarily happen outside of a context.
mm.
The context that you're in, we started off this discussion talking, I'm going to sort of bring it full circle. We
Yes,
were
sir.
talking about the economy and our politics, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Um, the harder it becomes to make it in this economy, the only way to beat it is to collectivize. It's the only way to beat capitalism is to collectivize. This is why unions are really important. That's why they've broken up unions. It's the
Yes.
only way that you can win in this rugged individualist capitalist system is to think differently and collectivize. It may ultimately take one woman with multiple partners to buy a home. If that's the society that we're living in, people are going to face the economic realities that one income won't do it, two incomes might not do it. I might need more to do it in order to buy that home that I really want to live in. Okay. Not
Hmm.
that, not just that 800 square feet, right?
Yeah.
Where we're bumping into one another all the time,
Yeah.
but something that's a livable space and where maybe I need to put 3, 4 credit scores together and figure out a way to put together what looks like a little corporate entity to buy a property that we can all share in. Now, that kind of stuff is happening too. And the fact of the matter is that there is, because there's a relationship between relationships and the economy, you could see people adjusting in terms of their sexuality. And I've long thought that this may be what's really happening, is that people are making really practical decisions, adjusting because of how hard it is out there.
Wow. What they say? Pimpin', pimpin'.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, even if you've got, let's say you've got two people in a household in a traditional situation,
Hmm.
you you know people who have faced moving out of their homes or moving out
Yeah.
of their apartments or whatever because one person loses their job. But remember, when you were a kid, that didn't necessarily happen as much, right? It might
Right.
be that that daddy was between jobs, or whatever, and mom had to pick up a little part-time work. Remember that?
Yes, I
Okay,
do.
you ain't doing that now. How are you doing that now? You need more money. If
Yeah.
somebody loses their full-time gig, who's going to plug that in? A little part-time work is not going to do it.
Yeah. Plus, in my field of work, I have to get 10 hours of sleep a night. Yeah.
There you go.
You understand what I'm saying? So, because I'm in the trucking industry, so if I wake up the next day and I have an accident, and God forbid it's a fatality, when they come to investigate, hey, this guy didn't get 10 hours of sleep. Hey, I'm behind bars.
That's right.
So that's a whole nother dynamic and phenomena that you look at, especially like when you deal with like people that's in law enforcement, people in aviation. But a lot of these people are making a decent dollar. But I think right there, man, I think we need to come back on and have that conversation because that right there is a very, very unique phenomena. And I don't think we're having that discussion. Actually, you kind of gave it some logic. You just gave it some logic to, well, at least helping me understand, the direction that a lot of men and women are taking when it comes to when they're getting away from the old traditional setup of relationships. I think we need to have that discussion again, man. We're gonna have to do that for another day.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting one.
Yeah. We can also, when we have that discussion, that ties into why people aren't having as many children as they used to have.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That is very true. Unless you down South Georgia, boy, they still pumping them out.
Yeah. Well, your cost of living isn't as bad as those. I saw that look on your face when I told you that gas was $4.79 a gallon
Yeah.
up here.
That's crazy. I
About that
mean,
heart attack.
they say California's the incubator. What goes on in Cali is gonna happen across the country because I know like, in the truck industry, California was the first state where you could not drive a truck in there. You had to have an ERG system on your truck, and it had to be within the 10 year or the FICA year or something like that. So if it was 2011, that what was it 2011? You couldn't have, I believe, a model truck older than 2001 could enter the state, or you'd be citated. So, and now here in Georgia, almost all the trucks have ERG systems. Most trucks will have ERG systems, but it started in California first. So, whatever happens in California, California is the incubator. It's going to happen across the country. So, that's a
Yeah.
lot. And I have a 8-cylinder. You know what I mean? I got a truck, and that thing guzzle gas. So paying that much, man, I had to tell my job I can only make it in 1 day a week. That's a lot for gas, dude. Like, yo, that is a lot. I think that costs more than diesel in Georgia, to be honest
Oh
with
yeah.
you.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That is definitely crazy. But man, I'm glad and thankful that you took time out to come on the platform tonight to bless us with the wisdom, to give us a lot of introspect on politics, black sexuality, which we are going to have another show about. And just the politics and everything about going on, the reality was going on in San Francisco and Oakland, and just everything about the novels and understanding about the podcaster's dilemma, breaking down the counter narratives, because I say this all the time, a lot of our people are not smarter than the narratives. And one area I really talk about a lot is sports. I would hope that you would come back on and we can have this discussion
Oh,
again.
you got me
And
anytime you want me. Anytime you want.
man, I appreciate you. And for everybody that's watching the show tonight, you can go down in the comment sections. Tell us about what you thought of the show. If you have any more questions leading into the next show, some things that I could bring to the table. And also, Brother Baham's book is down there. I hit the podcast dilemma, but when you click on the link, you will also see his other books that he's also submitted to the world for us to enjoy and read. Brother Baham, it's been a pleasure. I'm gonna give you the last word before we get out of here tonight.
Oh man, after everything we said, just look, keep the faith. All for everybody out there in that audience, keep the faith. Listen, we were here before. We've been here since 1619. We put up with a lot of stuff. Don't despair. Keep the faith. We will be here after all this nonsense too.
And on that note, man, thank you all for chiming in tonight. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Hey, Jihad, I got to run and